And was it easy to bring investment in, or were you self-funding those projects? Because now, obviously, there's institutions that understand BTR, but back then it must have been the more unusual thing to do.
We're not going to invest in an area and put a lovely building there if the surrounding area doesn't elevate the building.
How do you think Build to Rent fits into the government's very ambitious 1.5 million homes target? Michael, thank you so much for coming in. This podcast is about the future of cities, and I think through your discourse on LinkedIn and your illustrious career, you're one of the people that is defining the way we look at cities. But if we can, I'd like to start with your background. What kind of made you first want to go into real estate?
I kind of got into it in a slightly weird way. My father was a carpenter. I didn't really know what I was going to do when I was 14, 15, 16. I used to work with him occasionally, and then he was doing an extension of the house, and there was a guy walking around the garden with a suit on telling people what to do, and I went, oh, that sounds like a good job for me, and I inquired who that was, and it was a building control officer. And then I thought, oh, okay. I looked into that, and it seemed to be building surveying was the way into that. So again, I looked into what A-levels you needed and what courses you needed to do, and pursued a degree in building surveying. And bit weird. So I kind of looked at London Polys at the time. It was South Bank and Thames. And my headmaster of my school in Finchley said, you should go to university, not Poly, probably because he was a snob, but who knows. And I applied to Reading and interviewed and was given a place, and that was a real changing a point in my life which really transformed what happened to me, I think. So at Reading, they sat us down and told us they wanted us to be the future of the industry, not just building surveyors. I mixed with lots of people from different backgrounds in property. And left with a building surveying degree, and didn't really do building surveying. I worked for a company called Hunter and Partners in London, working on the conversion of houses into flats, estate regeneration, all of those sort of things, working for housing associations back
They
in
were
the day.
Hunters are architects.
When I joined in 89, they were the largest multidisciplinary practice in the country. So they were architects, surveyors, quantity surveyors. They had 350 strong, and by the time I left them in 95, there were 50 of them, because I arrived 6 months before the really bad property recession that no one really talks about, which was 90 to 93-4, which finished off lots of careers. The global financial crisis had nothing on that recession for property. It was really, really bad.
I'm glad I was at school for that one.
Yeah, there's lots of people that are at uni, and they're all scarred by it. So what it did mean is I got loads of amazing experience, because as the business got smaller, I got more and more opportunity. Yeah. Then I decided, actually, I heard about project management. I thought, I might try my hand at that, and joined Frank and Andrews as a project manager. Also not working in resi, because I'd had my fill of resi. I wanted to work in other sectors. So I started to work in retail, and banks, fit out for Frank and Andrews. They had a project management company called Osprey. So I joined that, and then that went from strength to strength. I ended up as a director there a few years later, and I worked on all sorts of different asset classes, everything from museums, laboratories, offices, railway stations. And actually, it was Frank and Andrews Osprey that I met Helen Gordon, who's the CEO of Grainger, and that's how I eventually got this role at Grainger. I used to work on things like the Victoria Station Master Plan 25 years ago, which still hasn't happened. Wow. I then left. I did an MBA in real estate because I wanted to go into development, I realised, and joined one of my clients the day we sold Frank and Andrews to Mott MacDonald's. So I worked there for 17 years in London, doing some really interesting projects, working for a very small developer, and did that, as I say, for 17 years. And then I crossed paths with Helen again, and Helen had embarked on turning Grainger around into a build-to-rent operator and developer, and joined her 7 years ago on that journey.
So Grainger must have been one of the kind of early movers in the build to rent space.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the first movers. I think even before Helen arrived, it had started its first deal, and I think it had been on the trail since the Montague report in 2012. So yeah, I mean, Grainger's been around since 1912. It started out as a landlord. It was buying tenements in Newcastle. It was owned by the Dickinson family. And then over the years, just expanded. It bought a lot of regulated tenancies, ex-coal board properties, etc., It grew and grew, became a PLC in, I think, 83. And it was originally Grainger Trust, actually, back in the day, and then became Grainger PLC, and started to diversify into more and more development, and did some more resi development mainly. And then 2016, as I say, Helen arrived and said, right, with your legacy since 1912 as a landlord, as a professional landlord, you have the infrastructure and the track record. Let's really simplify and focus the business and just do build to rent. And so that's what we did.
And was it easy to bring investment in, or were you self-funding those projects? Because now, obviously, there's institutions that understand BTR, but back then it must have been more, it's a more unusual thing to do.
Yeah, it's actually a brilliant question, because you're doing it from a standing start. The trick was that Helen identified some non-core businesses in the simplify and focus. So they sold out of an equity release business and a German residential business. And they had about 850 million from that to spend. And they deployed it from that point onwards in acquiring build-to-rent forward fund acquisitions and some land. So that 850 million, which takes quite a while to spend, kick-started it. And then we probably hit, as you say, a point where its shareholders were really pleased with what was happening. We were turning it into an income business around earnings rather than profits from development. And the shareholders really liked it and backed it. And so we've undertaken some equity raises over the period to keep funding our growth. And obviously we were a good bet for debt and corporate debt, which obviously we made use of. I think one of the interesting things, and I'd worked with Helen a long time ago, she's ever prudent as well as being an entrepreneur. She makes sure all of our debt was hedged. So as the interest rates rose over the last few years, our debt is still really low for a good 5 years more. So it insulated and allowed us to get ready for the next cycle.
And what about the sort of skill set, moving from Grainger being a landlord to a developer? Did you bring in construction in-house, or are you still using main contractors?
No, we run a really lean team, and that's the way that Helen likes to run the business. So we have a development management team and an acquisition team. We do a lot of forward funding, so we're doing arm's length development. We're funding other developers who appointed their own contractors. We won't do in-house construction. We don't have enough volume for that. So we are contracting with the rest of the market. So we use large contractors. We employ all of our external consultants, architects, etc. And our team is primarily development people or acquisition people. We don't also do project management in-house. We tend to sub that out as well.
And so are you when you're acquiring sites, are they pre-planning, or are you mostly getting them with planning and then?
A real mixture. So we'll buy land which is unconsented, or we'll buy conditional, or we'll sign up to options, agreements for lease, which are conditional on us getting planning. But as I say, a huge amount of what we've built, we've built 28 schemes around the country since 2015. A lot of those are forward-funded schemes because they were the quickest way to deploy our 850 million. And there was a raft of opportunities out there of sites with consent, with developers, with contractors in tow. So they've done all the hard work for us.
Yeah.
So we will do anything. Fundamentally, we don't mind whether we're buying land to develop ourselves, forward funding another developer, or buying stabilised stock. Assets, the build-to-rent assets that have already been built, and we've got the Forge in Newcastle and the Astley in Manchester, which we bought, which are stabilised.
And would you say that post-COVID there's sort of been a change in the way that build to rent works, in the kind of the tenure of the people, and also maybe the investment appetite for it?
So we've always thought that COVID really told people what build to rent really was. So it almost came of age, accelerated from COVID, because in COVID, of course, you couldn't go outside, and so your environment was literally the flat you're in or the house you're in, and the amenities that you might have, and the service you got. And in a way, it came of age through that. People really understood it. At the same time as COVID, we had the energy cost spike as well, and therefore you're in buildings which are EPC C, B, A, and of course the energy costs aren't high, and they didn't spike in the way that, say, a gas boiler would spike on a typical PRS. So I think COVID did a lot to prove the benefit of the model to investors, because obviously it kept on letting, and the rents kept rising, and the occupancy was really high, 98%, and it also proved it to our customers. And I personally lived in one of our blocks for a year between the two lockdowns in London, because I didn't want to travel during COVID up and down. I lived down south, and I lived there with my son, and honestly I'd recommend any build to rent operator does it, because you actually get to understand what build to rent really is.
That's very cool. In terms of the sort of sustainability, I think it's interesting. I've been kind of doing a bit of research at the moment, and I think the commercial sector sort of gets sustainability in a way that residential doesn't, because at the point where you sell a flat, I'm just going to wait for that siren to go past it. Sorry.
It's the climate police.
Yeah. At the point that you sell a property on the open market, a residential property, its environmental performance is not one of the primary concerns. It's location and it's, style or history, or, has it got original features? When you're renting it, I think that might be different, and actually these things sort of matter more. So do you think there's an opportunity for build to rent and also kind of co-living, which is like a subsector, to sort of push the sustainability agenda?
When you talk about sustainability,
operating,
that's a huge area. Are
operating
you really
energy.
Talking about
operational energy,
carbon, right?
Yeah,
operational and embodied
cost.
Carbon, rather than the full gamut of sustainability. If we just talk about carbon, the reality, I'm afraid, is this. So the office sector, for example, and maybe other sectors, they can monetize low carbon operational buildings, maybe even monetize low embodied carbon buildings, because the people that they're letting and selling to want that for their own reasons, their own ESG credentials. And so office buildings, they'll pay more rent, because actually there's a dearth of that supply and they desperately want it. So that's what I would call the carrot method of sustainability, which is you're building into a market that has a demand for it and is willing to pay. The reality is that the general British public, the renters, our customers, they're not that concerned about how low carbon the building is to operate or how it was built. They're mired in a cost of living crisis. They need a home in a location. They've got a budget. That's all that matters. So that sounds pretty cynical, but I'm afraid that's what we see. But as I say, people wouldn't really pick up and look at EPCs and decide whether or not to rent a flat. Say 3 or 4 years ago, they do now. Yeah,
and I think that the cost, I don't know how you do it, but so with co-living, for example, the cost of the energy to heat the unit is built into the rental cost.
Yes.
So then it does, you don't see it, but there's a sort of benefit.
So if it's all-inclusive bills like that, then you can imagine that the operator can set a rent with an all-inclusive and he can make money that way.
Yeah.
We don't operate like that, so we will not do all-inclusive bills, because our understanding of sustainability and accountability is people should be responsible for how much energy they use. If you put it free within the rent, they'll just use it or they won't care. So we always have them take their own energy, their own water, and then it's up to them how they use that. But we also have a Living a Greener Life campaign to try and help them keep those costs down. So what they pay for utilities is their own business, but because of the cost of living crisis, they're all very interested in energy efficiency.
Yeah.
And so an EPC will definitely help let a flat.
Yeah.
And they'll factor in the total cost of renting in that scenario. But that's as far as it goes. Embodied carbon, that
well,
has
the commercial
no
sector's,
value.
The commercial sector's no good at tracking that either, I don't think, really, because the sort of Class A office is often new build rather than retrofit, and that's probably the highest embodied carbon.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's any better, and BREEAM doesn't really register it either.
Exactly.
So. Placemaking.
Yeah.
That's a sort of buzzword that you hear a lot. Do you think there's a sort of placemaking premium, and what's Grainger's attitude towards this idea that you must, or you can, or you should create new places that kind of sit in their environment and allow people to kind of understand their context?
Yeah, I mean, I think placemaking is probably fundamental to underpinning your investment in an area. There's little point. I mean, we build blocks of, say, 200, 300, 400, when I say blocks, little developments. We generally won't be the regeneration of the area, we'll be a part of it. But it's really important to us, and in fact, one of our decisions is we're not going to invest in an area and put a lovely building there if the surrounding area doesn't elevate the building. Because effectively what we have is a situation where people will rock up to the front door, it'll be a nice building, but this doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel quality. So absolutely, it's an experience. So you want to be coming to a building that feels like the environment it sits in makes sense to you and is part of how you see you living your life, and then the building sitting there is consistent with it. That's really quite important, and placemaking, particularly after COVID, because we all were desperate to get out of our buildings and around the block, and you wanted to be able to go places and sit out. So placemaking, I don't think you can design buildings properly unless you understand how it's sitting in its context and you're adding something which is mutually beneficial. It's really, really important.
And how do you kind of, I mean, it's a bit ephemeral, isn't it? How do you kind of measure like what is good? What are the magic ingredients of good placemaking? And then how do you kind of police it through the design process and make sure it doesn't get value engineered out? So
our problem is in the sense that we're not providing a new quarter. So if you look at places like Royal Wharf in London, that Ballymore did, they built a whole new quarter with all of the amenities that and the green spaces and all those things that you need to do. So we have to think about where we're buying, what the current context is, and how what we do on our site sits with everything else that's going. And so it's really about design, and I think it's about conviction. So do you put green spaces on roofs? Do you have good landscaping, which is, got some green and some trees and some seating areas, and where's the nearest amenities in terms of, shops, etc. You have to think about it all in the round. So I think cutting corners on that bit, value engineering as you describe it, is probably a mistake.
It's interesting, a sort of similar point to that. I think, to me, it appears like BTR has a sort of Goldilocks relationship. There's certain places where the land is too expensive, and then there's certain places where the rent's too cheap. So it only kind of it could only work on like the edge of London, or sort of like bits of Manchester, but it doesn't work everywhere. Is that your experience of it?
I've never heard it described like that. I think that's a really interesting point. So you're right. You're absolutely right. So there are places where the rent is not high enough to make it viable to build a build-to-rent building. There's a lot of talk at the moment about amenity-like build-to-rent. For me, the benefit of build-to-rent, as I like to define it and as Grainger define it, is a building where you've got sufficient amenity within it to build the community in the building, to keep the people, and as I say, 65% of our customers stay and renew. If you go amenity light, you're losing that community piece, and you're basically providing a PRS block. So we won't do that. We are very much around, this is the product and it needs to be viable in that location. But to your point, low rents is not a good story for viability. So yes, it won't come forward. You might not even get a PRS block. And absolutely right, in high land value areas, you will not get the rents that you need to compete against house builders or other uses. But we've got central London schemes. We've got schemes in Zone 2 and in region areas like Canning Town, where it really does work, and Barking and Islington and Hackney. So it does work in London. It doesn't have to be around the fringe. It really needs to be somewhere that needs regeneration. That's where it really can. And one of our proudest schemes, I think, recently is we built a scheme in Derby on the main high street, which will definitely is part of regenerating the centre, and it is definitely doing really well, and it will then be a catalyst for further regeneration. And like we did an amazing scheme in Nottingham, which was otherwise on car park land near the station, and it's transformed the area. So I think there is a Goldilocks bit right now. By the way, it's very difficult to find where Goldilocks might be happy. It's she's looking a bit sleepy.
Tough getting any characters of any books to work at the moment, I think. But that's the challenge of the industry. How do you think build to rent fits into the government's very ambitious 1.5 million homes target? What I think it accounts for around, I'm going to say 3% now, and I'm possibly regretting that, but 3% of the UK population lives in build to rent. Do you think that can be increased, and how much of an impact can build to rent make on hitting this 1.5 million?
I think there's about 150,000 build to rent homes, and some of those will be single family. So I also differentiate between ultra urban build to rent blocks and single family housing for rent. As I think there's about 150,000 homes which are built to rent in this country, and I tend to separate out urban build to rent from single family housing. Some of that 150,000 is single family housing. It is a very small proportion of the stock, and I think there's 4.5 million rental homes even. It's a small amount of the rental market. And you're probably right about 3%. It's got its part to play. It's not a panacea. It's not going to add hundreds of thousands of homes a year. Certainly not at the moment. It's taken us 5 or 6 years to get to 100,000. I think it's a more nuanced offer than that. It's brilliant in certain places of regeneration to really kickstart development, because you can build 200 homes and they'll let up within a couple of months, and suddenly community started, and then you can do some private for sale and other uses.
And it's quicker.
So it's part of the jigsaw. It is not the answer on its own. And there are, as you said about Goldilocks, places where it won't work.
And what do you think about the policy moves the government have made so far? They talk a good game. Do you think that there's anything that they have said that is going to assist you as a developer bringing forward homes?
Wow.
And also, what are they not saying? What are they not doing?
That's an interesting question. I've said this before. I think we can talk about planning reform till the cows come home, and we're going through that again, which will be the third time, I think, in the last 5 years. The thing that is the most important thing, I think, that's changed is that Labour have said they're YIMBYs. And that, I don't think that should be underestimated, what that does to the discussion and people's appetite, because now you're not on the wrong side of the debate, you're on the right side of the debate. And it's much more difficult in an environment where we're saying, actually, we're YIMBYs and we need it, and we desperately do need housing and other infrastructure. I think just changing the narrative around that is probably the biggest thing that they'll ever do. Changing the planning system, fine. It's the planning system as it is could work if there was a will to build, but it's cutting through the blockage to build, and I think they've done an amazing job in a very short period of time saying no, we're going to build. So I think that's pretty. I'm the most optimistic about being on the right side of the argument, which is we do need homes, so we better get building them, than I can remember, certainly in my time at Grainger.
Yeah.
In terms of policies, I think we've got our own registered provider, Grainger Trust as it's now called. We've got a registered provider with TfL with our joint venture. We like the concept of building discount market rent homes with private rent homes in a tenure blind community. That gives us a real warm and fuzzy feeling. Yeah. We think it makes for great community. That's why Darren Rodwell and I are such good muckers. And we would build that as long as it makes financial sense. We're happy to develop that. And I think that's the way we should be developing. It should be mixed tenure as best we can. To do that now, you need more subsidy into the equation, which is starting to be seen, and that's really the blocker is the lack of subsidy. More subsidy, more homes.
Just before Labour came in, Homes England gave £2 billion back to the Treasury because they didn't spend it. Yeah. The GLA, it's like prizing blood out of stone. Like the money is there, it's just really hard to get your hands on.
The money, the GLA's money that they've got, they've pretty much spent. So they've spent the money to the 2026. They got a bit more, and they're looking at judiciously where they apply that. But the social housing grant for England a year is about 2.3 billion. That's not enough. It's just not enough, and so you're always going to have a problem where there's more schemes than money. So I don't agree at the moment that the money is there, and everyone's waiting for the spending review to see whether more money is put into the 26 pot or how 27 onwards is going to go. There's a huge amount of lobbying across public sector, private sector, everyone saying we need more money to build affordable homes. I don't think anyone would argue that's in the industry of around solving the housing crisis, whether it's private sector or an RP, that subsidy won't make the difference. It does.
And I think before we started, you gave a good work demonstration, which we can summarise now, of what £300,000 from the Treasury will get you in terms of return.
Well,
yeah,
I can turn it around another way, which is the work we've done with a whole cohort of other people. Suggests that a social rent home in London probably needs about £300,000 worth of subsidy, and without it, it won't come forward. But that £300,000 of subsidy doesn't make the developer any money, doesn't make the RP any money. It really feeds back into what the Treasury earn. So from the corporation tax and the income tax of developing these properties, through to the temporary accommodation bill dropping, through to the benefits bill dropping, through to the premium in the NHS, and actually giving people a safe, secure home means they may be more productive in the future. So there's a load of sort of ideas of the benefit the Treasury get, and the Treasury will get multiples of that original 300,000 investment, but it will come through various avenues. If I put it another way to you, the £2.3 billion we spend on temporary accommodation is a huge amount of money and could be put to better use funding bonds to build homes or actually subsidising the building of social rent homes by RPs than paying it into the local authority coffers we spent in hotels and the PRS.
Completely agree. It's difficult to understand how it can't be done.
I think it can be done. I think it's a really simple answer, but it's a difficult execute.
Yes. Well, I think there's a problem with the bond markets. They're so unpredictable now that I think that you could, I think everybody since Truss is a bit terrified of a blind spot that they haven't.
Difficult to raise taxes. Look what happened. Difficult to raise bonds. There are other methods. You could use revenue subsidies, etc. But the question is, the method is almost secondary to the will. If the will is there, then you find all the different levers you can pull. But my fundamental message in that is you can't have subsidised housing without subsidy, and social rent needs a big subsidy.
Do you think part of the problem is that the development industry doesn't do enough to explain to the general population the benefits of development. And I say that, that I think there was a statistic that people trust, 2% of people trust developers. And I think it's 2% of people trust politicians. So when you have the Treasury and developers saying we need money for social housing, you can see that there's, 2% times 2% is whatever, less than 2%. There's a lack of trust there. Is the industry doing enough?
That is a really difficult question. So Helen Gordon and Guy Grainger and past presidents of the BPF had decided for 3 terms that they would all work on raising the recognition of what developers do and trying to claw back some respectability. I'm not sure where that got to, really. It's a really difficult ask. You're right that people don't understand the benefits that development brings. I'm not sure whether or not it's within the power of the industry to communicate that to the general public. However, and certainly not when this happens, which is that if the establishment, the government and local authorities are on the bandwagon bashing the developers, you've got no chance. And unfortunately, I think what we've seen for years and years is a narrative around greedy developers that don't do anything except lie in their own pockets. Social value and all those other things are not really talked about. In fact, I did some research to work out where the records were kept of how much Section 106 cash and benefits in kind were delivered by, say, the house building sector in this country. And I found that they don't keep records of it. So if there's no records of how much money is in Section 106 agreements of all this planning gain, how on earth are you supposed to tell people some of the obvious benefits, which is cash and housing, that development gives, the direct benefit, never mind the indirect benefit?
Well, I think, and that's another point, is that once that, SIL or Section 106 money is given to the local authorities, I think that people feel like maybe there's not enough scrutiny over ring fencing it to be.
Well, it doesn't get spent, and because it doesn't get spent, then all of the other things that the Section 106 money was supposed to be paid for, like paying for school land or a play, whatever it might be, that isn't in the developer's control, doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And therefore they go, well, the developer did this and we haven't got that. So I think developers are having it pretty terribly in terms of the public perception of what they do. It's incredibly unfair because development does so much for this country, and I don't know the answer about how you change the dynamic.
Well, I think you're right. Maybe that the sort of signposting of like development being good is going to start. And I think so. We had a breakfast the other day with one of the housing local government ministers, and we had a person there from local authority senior planner, and he was saying it's already helped. It's helped with the committee. The committee are now on board. They get that we have to get things through instead of previously where there might be more of a tendency to try and find a reason not to get something through. So, and
that's because of the change in being more YIMBY. We need the infrastructure.
Exactly.
I think that is, as I say, I'm delighted to see that change.
Definitely. So I kind of want to start towards wrapping up. What's next for Grainger in terms of the next 5 years? What's the outlook? And also, same question, but kind of for the industry and build to rent.
I think it's the same answer for build to rent and Grainger, because we're the largest listed operator. We are one of the leading operators, along with, I would guess, in terms of across the country, L&G and us have quite a wide geographical spread. And there are some other fantastic businesses in build to rent. So I think it's the same, which I think the answer is more of the same. So as I say, we launched 28 buildings. We've got about 10,000 homes, which are built to rent homes. We've got a pipeline of another 4,000 or 5,000. We want to deliver all of those, and we would like to keep growing the business and do more of this. We are almost evangelical about what we do. It is something we really believe in. We're really proud. The company, the people that work in the company are proud of what we do. It is a great product. It's very difficult, but it's a great product. And so it ticks boxes. So we're creating homes. Staff love working in that environment, delivering homes, and our shareholders are happy enough. I say happy enough because, you know, it's difficult times. But so if we can keep all of those three groups happy, which I think we can, then we've got a long future. So 1912 onto 2012 or 2112, whatever it might be.
2112.
Certainly another 100 years, but not with me there.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, thanks.
Pleasure.